Hi, guys. Welcome to Comprehension for day 3 for our story, The Wreck of the Titanic. And hopefully, if you're watching this video, that means you're definitely smart enough to have read the story, The Unsinkable Wreck of the RMS Titanic, or at least watched one of the other videos that we posted on days 1 and 2. That I posted an introduction video for the Titanic. And I also posted a really neat one yesterday, a video tour of the wreck of the Titanic. So if you haven't watched those, they're real short. They're not very long. And you haven't read your story, you really need to stop right here and go back and do the assignments in Schoology that are listed there. So you are prepared, okay, for your test coming up this week. So we're going to move on if you have done those things. And I'm going to share with you a word of warning. This is the number one student mistake on this story, okay? This is a story about the wreck of the Titanic and going through what's left behind on the seafloor. This is not a story about being on the Titanic before it wrecks. Everybody makes that mistake. Everybody thinks, oh, it's a story about the Titanic, so they're going to tell us about the day that it wrecked. Well, they do a little bit. But no, the majority of the story is the guys in the Alvin submarine, right, who are cruising along and looking at what remains down at the bottom of the ocean. So a lot of the questions are geared towards what's going on with it much later, and everybody thinks it's about the wreck. But no, it's not about the wreck, the day of the wreck in 1912. It's about touring what remains on the seafloor, okay? So what do I mean by that? Let me give you an example of a question. It says, what graphic source could better help us understand the story? A map of where the Titanic sank or a diagram of the ship? Well, if you were talking about being on the Titanic when it wrecked, then a map of where it sank would tell you more. But if we're talking about the wreck of the ship itself as it sits on the bottom of the ocean, then a diagram of the ship would be a better graphic source, right? Which is why this story, because it's about the wreck of the Titanic, not the accident that led to the wreck, a diagram of the ship is a better graphic source to help us understand the story. Do you see the problem? If you go ahead and think, oh, this story is about being on the Titanic when it sank. No, it's already sunk. It's already at the bottom of the ocean. It's been on the bottom of the ocean for more than 100 years. So we're talking about what remains at the bottom. And so to understand what remains at the bottom, we really kind of need a diagram of a ship, the ship it sank, right? Who was Frederick Fleet? Now the sub sailed out over the well deck, following the angle of the fallen foremast up towards the liner's bridge. We paused at the crow's nest. Oh, see, this is what they're riding around in that submarine under the water looking at stuff. On the fateful night, lookout Frederick Fleet had been on duty here. It was he who warned the bridge, iceberg right ahead. Fleet was one of the lucky ones. He made it into a lifeboat and to safety. So who is Frederick Fleet? He was the lookout. It says right there, doesn't it? Lookout. He's the guy that spotted the iceberg first and yelled the warning, right? That's what a lookout does. They look ahead to see what's out ahead. Thus the name Lookout, right? So he was the lookout. Who was William Murdoch? It was here that First Officer William Murdoch, desperate to avoid the mountain of ice that lay in the Titanic's path, shouted to the helmsman, "Hard a starboard!" Then Murdoch watched in excruciating agony as the huge ship slowly began to turn, but it was too late, and the iceberg fatally grazed the liner's side. So who was William Murdoch? Well, it says it. Let's go to the text, right? First Officer William Murdoch. So he was an officer on the ship. He was the first officer. There's some people confused. They think, well, he's the captain. No, he wasn't the captain. A first officer is the guy who takes over for the captain when the captain is not working. The captain was asleep at the time. So William Murdoch is like the second-hand guy right under the captain. He's a first officer, okay? What is the main idea of this paragraph? In my mind's eye, I could see the deck surging with passengers as the crew tried to keep order during the loading of the lifeboats. The broken arm of a lifeboat davit hung over the side, and from the spot port side, lifeboat number 2 was launched, barely half full. Among the 25 people in a boat designed to carry more than 40 were Minnie Coots and her 2 boys, Wheelie and Neville. They were among the relatively few third-class passengers to survive the sinking. So what is this telling us about this paragraph? It's telling us about the side of the ship, right? The port side of the ship where the number 2 lifeboat was launched. And it's telling us about the people who got on that number 2 lifeboat, but there were only 25 of them when they could have put 40 of them. And if you've watched the videos earlier that I asked you to, you know that a lot of the people who died on the Titanic, they died because of just not being prepared and organized getting on the lifeboats. So what's this paragraph telling us about? It's definitely telling me that there was a lot of confusion. Let's look at the clues. Deck surging with passengers. Boat launched half full. Was it calm and quiet that night as they were loading those boats? Or was it panic and everybody being nervous and making foolish mistakes? Yep, definitely panic and foolish mistakes. What is the author's purpose in writing this story, huh? Why have this? The story about the wreck of the Titanic there as it lay on the bottom. So first of all, ask yourself, is this story fiction or nonfiction? Definitely nonfiction. It's giving us facts and information, right? All right, so there are 2 authors' purposes for nonfiction text. It's either to persuade or is it to inform or educate us about something? What do you think? I definitely think it's giving us facts and information in order to inform or educate us about the wreck of the Titanic as it lays on the bottom, right? Good job. So why did so many people die on the Titanic? Well, let's think about it for a minute. In the text, it says, from this spot, portside, lifeboat number 2 was launched, barely half full. So did they do a good job loading the lifeboats? No, they didn't. They didn't have a plan, right? They weren't expecting it. It was called the unsinkable Titanic, so nobody expected it to sink on its very first voyage. And even if they were good at loading people on the lifeboats, did they have enough lifeboats for all the passengers? No, they only had enough lifeboats for half of the people. They had 2,000 plus people on the Titanic, and they only had enough lifeboats for about 1,500 of them. It's not a good situation, is it? So why did so many people die on the Titanic? They didn't have enough lifeboats for all the passengers, and they sure didn't do a good job loading up those lifeboats that they did have, right? All right, guys. I think this is a really cool story, right? Especially a historical topic and a little bit of science as we're talking about the wreck as it goes on down at the bottom. And so I will see you in comprehension tomorrow. Have fun, guys. See you on the flip side.